is Gemara Yevamos Daf Yomi. All the learning has been generously sponsored as an incredible schos for Hashem B'Chadalei Basaradina. We are hoping and praying and davening and learning that Amir Hashem, all the learning should be an incredible schos for Chadalei Basaradina to have a complete recovery, as well as learning is a schos shel v'zochaim Torah Tamzib Basarach Shalom Levizava V'Mentali Shem El Chayav L'Miyud Tzvas Sima Malka, as well as schos for Shalom Shel Yosef V'Eder Shmon Tzilon of Tzazim B'Chlas Necham Bas Shiva Sor Blum Bas Mendel Chaim Yeshua Ben Malka B'Soich Sha'ar Chayli Yisrael. We're holding on the bottom of Ayin Dalet Amud Beis, and we're in the middle of trying to figure out which part of the Tahira process refers to which entity. The three stages being going to the mikvah, the sun setting, and bringing a karbanos. We have Chuma, we have Meiser Sheni, we have Chuma, and we have Kachim. We already had one teretz. We finished up yesterday with the second teretz of Rava. Now we are holding 6 lines from the bottom, and Rav Shisha Breder of Idi comes along and asks, Rav Shisha Breder of Idi, Mimat is Amid Chuma Ksiva Acha. Can you suggest that the pasuk here is referring to Truma? Again, these are within the two psukim of Abaya, who said that we're referring to Yoledes. For Atani, we learned in a brayse Dabrel b'nei Yisrael, Ein liel b'nei Yisrael. How do we know that the pasuk includes even a Giyores and a shivcha, that when they give birth, they also have a din of a yoledes, that they are tamei. Tamaloymar isha v'sakadaitel b'chuma. And if you're going to tell me that this pasuk of yoledes teaches me the din about tama with regard to eating truma, geris and shivcha b'nismecha trumaninu. What's going on? A geris and shivcha are never allowed to eat truma. So Amar Rava, says Rava back, v'loi. Really? Is it what you're saying correct? What we learned in the pasuk is we turn over to Ayin Hey Amid Aleph B'chol Kaidesh Eloi Siga, says in the pasuk that any kachim she's not allowed to touch. L'Rabbois had Shuma, which comes to include Shuma. That we see that a ger and a shivcha, that even though you're right, they're not allowed to eat a Truma, still the psukim are referring to Truma. They're referring to the fact that the master, the Rav, the Adain, tells them B'chol Kaidesh Eloi Siga that you're not allowed to touch the truma. So rather, says Rava, the pasuk we have to compartmentalize the pasuk, that it does teach us the rule about truma, even though it's not really fully applicable to the ger and the shivcha mishachreres. Says the Gemara, okay, that really concludes yesterday. But ask the Gemara, tlasa kroi b'truma lamali. Why do we need 3 different psukim by Truma? As Rashi over here delineates the 3 different psukim. So explains the Gemara, Srichi, you know why we need the 3 psukim? If we just had the pasuk about the Zera Aroin Mitzaras Zav, which was yesterday, the bottom of Amid Aleph, Lavi Adana b'mai Kos Rachmana, I wouldn't know what the Torah is talking about. So Ubash Lavi Adana b'mai, I would not have known what we're referring to. So, the sun said you become tar, and then you can eat from kachim, which refers to truma. Just the second which, by the way, if you're thinking this is really going through the shaklatara that we had yesterday in Amud Beis, and we're saying that each pasuk comes to answer another kasha. Pasuk number 1, we wouldn't know it's referring to, so said pasuk number 2 to tell us about truma. Pasuk number 2, I wouldn't know that even if you needed a kapar, you don't have to bring that kapar. So therefore, we need the pasuk of because if we just had a third pasuk, I think you don't even need the tefillah. The carbon itself is enough. So therefore, the pasuk had to write all 3 psukim, and these 3 psukim are combining to teach us this. And ask the Gemara, but according to the Tana that argues on Tana there Ishmael, if you remember yesterday in Amud Beis, we came along and we said, according to Rabbi Yishmael, everything is great. Because Rabbi Yishmael explains to us that the pasuk is referring to a zav bal shtei riyos and a mitzayra muskar, both of which are not completely tamei. So says the Gemara, fine, but what about those who argue on Rabbi Yishmael and says that no, that when the pasuk says zera aroin sav and saras, it means a full-fledged zav, it means a full-fledged mitzayra. And now the pasuk takes on a new meaning. Adashe yitar means you need to bring a carbon, because it's talking about a zava gedayla. It's talking about someone who's a mitzayra muchlat. In these cases, you need to bring a carbon. So I asked the Gemara, so Trey Karai Bikachim Lamali. So now we're back to square one. Now we have two psukim teaching us the same din. So explains the Gemara, I would have thought Misham de Meruba Tomasa, that has a lot of tameh. She's tameh for, depending on if she had a boy or a girl, it's going to be many, many days. As Rashi points out, for an akeva, there's going to be 80 days of Tumah. 66 and 33, 66 and 34, I believe. Avol be'ezav emaloi. But by ezav, obviously the Tumah is not as much. I would think not. I would thought ezav is not exempted, it's not pulled out of the category of what we're referring to. And that's the reason why we need both psukim. Says the Gemara, but 1 second. Why do we need that pasuk? This pasuk refers to teach us about the isser of negia, of touching truma. That not only if one is tameh, he's not allowed to eat truma before he goes to the mikvah, and as erev shemesh, as we just learned. Again, the three categories: A is being meiser sheni, just needs mikvah; B, truma needs nightfall; kachim, C, needs the kapara the next morning. So I would have thought it only has to do with regard to eating it. But how do we know you're not even allowed to touch the truma before you have erev shemesh? The Tanya, as we learned in our brayso, v'tameh, it says in the pasuk v'tameh. Yochal akol. I would think he's tamei for everything until erev shemesh, till the nightfall. Tamalemer v'tar. So we have conflicting words in the pasuk that we don't know exactly what's going on. So how do we reconcile this difference? Kan lemaiser, kan lechuma. As we just said, the meiser sheni, your tar, after you go to the mikvah for chuma, you need to have nightfall, you need to have erev shemesh. Ve'ebachana, the classical kasha, how do you know? How do you know chuma and meiser? How do you know which one is which one is right after the mikvah, and which one you need nightfall? Explains the Gemara, mistavra gechad chamira achila de chuma me achila de meiser achinami chamil negia de chuma negia de meiser. Makes a lot of sense. With regard to eating it, we find that truma is more chamer than meiser. You can't eat the truma until nightfall. So too says the Gemara. With regard to touching, we'll have the same din. Answer number 1. V'bayisema. Answer number 2. To teach us that with regard to truma, you need to have sunset, you need to have erev shemesh, even with regard to negia, touching the truma. Negia de truma me'achanaf. We learn out from this pasuk. B'chol kodesh lo'isiga says you should not touch the kachim. Azhara lo'oichalinu elenagea. What is the pasuk referred to when it says do not touch the kodesh? Eating or touching? Tamalaymer b'chol kodesh lo'isiga v'la mikdash lo'isavai. And a different pasuk says you should not touch the kachim and you should not come into the Beis HaMikdash. So what do we see from this second pasuk? Makish kodesh le'mikdash. It puts together the touching of the kodesh, of the kachim, with entering into the Beis HaMikdash. Ma mikdash, just like when it refers to entering into the Beis HaMikdash, davar sheish ben etil siyashama, there's a krisos. If someone comes into the Beis HaMikdash when they're tamei, they're chayiv misa netilas neshama, there's krisos. Av kodesh davar sheish ben etil siyashama, o ben egia netilas neshama, leka by the afke b'lash negia achikamar negia ke'achila. So what's the Torah teaching us? Teaching the negia is the same level as achila, and therefore just like by truma, when are you allowed to eat the truma? When there is nightfall, erev shemesh, sunset. So too with regard to negia, and that ends the lengthy discussion from yesterday, proving us these three entities. Meiser Sheni, Truma, and Kachim have 3 different times when one becomes Tahar. Meiser Sheni, one is allowed to both eat and touch, we're learning now, after he goes to the mikvah. Truma, you're allowed to eat and touch after there's Erev Shemesh, nightfall. And Kachim, you're allowed to eat after you bring the Karban the next morning. And now we go back to the Mishnah from a few days ago, in which the Mishnah taught us, B'tzua Daka, all of the different issues that one has, male issues, whether his testicles are wounded or crushed, severed, etc., etc. We said you're allowed to eat truma. However, we said their wives are not allowed to eat. But we said, but if one is married to a kayin, and then the husband has an issue, he becomes a psuadaka because shivcha, his testicle is wounded, his aver is maimed. We'll see what all these things mean. Then we said, and they were not together. The husband and wife did not have relations after he became a psua daka and a kruf shivcha, then she's allowed to, yes, eat truma. Just to point out one detail before we see this Gemara, which is going to be a very technical, different details, what exactly it means. These are very, very negei halach lemaisa nowadays to figure out different surgical procedures which people have to have at times, whether it's when one gets older or whether it's when one has different issues, Rahman al-Itzlan, whether he has a din of a kudshivcha and a psua daka, and the nafkamina, as we're going to see, is an isser daraisa. Whenever you're playing with a daraisa, is not a simple endeavor, and therefore it all does come from this Gemara, and as much as it's going to be quite difficult, as we're going to see very technical terms, it's severed, it's cut from the atara, from the korona, all the different parts of the iver. But let's really understand, the Ramesh has many chuvas that come straight from this Gemara, teaching us the halacha. But let's continue. I'm not saying I'm fluent in these, just the little bit that I do know. Let's continue. Says the Gemara, we're about 15 lines from the bottom of the two dots, psua daka. So first of all, says the Gemara, man tana mishtameres labia psula daraisa akala. Says the Achla, how do we know that one who is awaiting a bia psula is still allowed to eat truma? Because we just said in the Mishnah, if they're married, and then the husband becomes a psua daka and a kuf shivcha, as long as they are not together, husband and wife, then she's still allowed to eat truma. So who is this opinion that says that even though the husband is pasul, she's allowed to eat truma as long as they were not together? I'm Rav Elazar b'machleges shnuya, Rav Elazar Rav Shimon, he Rav Yochanan Amar, afilu teim Rav Meir. It can even be Rav Meir. Shani acha shekvar achla. This case is different, says Rav Meir. This doesn't have to do with the classical machlekes husband and wife if the wife is awaiting a bia psula. Because says Rav Meir, this case is different. She's already been eating truma, so it's easier to allow her to continue eating truma than to let her start eating truma. Rav Elazar shekvar achla. And he does not believe in that idea. You know why? Says Rav Elazar, if you're not going to tell me that, then when you have a Bas Yisrael that's married to a Kayin, umeis baila, and the husband, the Kayin, dies to Eichel, maybe she should continue eating. Why? Shekvar achla. So says Rav Elazar, I do not hold to this idea. The fact that you once ate truma does not give you the liberty to continue eating truma. Whereas Rav Yochanan, what is Rav Yochanan? He argues and he says, awesome, no. Says Rav Yochanan, there's a very, very fundamental difference. Over there, when the husband dies, then what? Paka kinyana, the acquisition is no longer here, and that's why she can't eat truma. But in our case, it's loy paka kinyana. They're still married. The husband just became pasul, and therefore says Rabbi Yochanan, it's easier to allow this woman who's now married to a husband who's kroshivcha psuadaka as an issue with the testicle, with the aver and other issues, as we'll see, to continue eating truma. And now we go into the technical part of Ezeu Psua Daka. What is the science? What is this case? Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabban on 8 lines, Ezeu Psua Daka Kol Shenifseu Beitzim Shelah. Says the Gemara, you know, it refers to that the Beitzim, the testicles, we'll use the word Beitzim for the duration of the shir today, but it's referring to the testicles of the aver. Says the Gemara, it's referring to if the beitzim were wounded. Vafilu achas, even only one of them. Vafilu, not only even only one. Vafilu nikvu, even if they just had a hole. Vafilu nimaiku, and even if they became dissolved. Vafilu chasru, and even if only part of it is missing. So only there are 4 potential minor, we'll call them. They're missing, they're whole. There's a dissolved of the beitzim that still renders the person a psua daka. Amar Rav Shimon ben Yochanan ben Breika Shama. You know what I heard? No, if he only has one beitza, he only has the din of a sris chama. A sris chama is a term which refers to that it happened by the son, which is a term that means it wasn't done by man, it was done by Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is the kasher. So Rav Yochanan ben Breika argues, and he says in this case, it's going to be kasher. Says Mara, what? Sris chama? How can it be that you're telling me that it is a sris chama? Meaning, because this is something done by man. This was a psua daka. It just happened to one of the beitzim, but it wasn't something that happened on its own. Explains the Gemara, you're right. El arehu kisris chama. It's similar. The kosher just means that it's the same level that you are kosher. Ask the Gemara, what's the basic pretense that all of these people are apostle for Chuma? The reason being, apostle ikuna. The reason being is they can't have children. So ask the Gemara in the Brisa we just listed, there were 4 different cases we said. So ask the Gemara, if one of them was that the beitzim had a hole in it. Loi moilid, is such a person able to have children, which is usually the litmus test, whether there is this issue or not, and whether you're puzzled. I said lakuna, excuse me, you're puzzled to marry Klal Yisrael. V'nikev loi moilid, v'ahu gaver that sold the dikla, there was a certain person went up to a date palm tree, turning over to Ayin Hea Mebeis. V'chir zei silva bebeitzim. And what happened? And there was a thorn that made a hole in his beitzim. And yet, v'nafim men achot demugla. Not yet. And excuse me. And there was some pus, ooze, semen that came out of him. And yet, v'oilid, he still gave birth. So seemingly, even one who has a hole in the beitzim still is able to have children. Explains the Gemara. Shalach Shmuel lekamei derav amar lei seiva chazer al banav. Go check out his children. Mein hey. He was very nervous, even though he had children. They were nervous that obviously that the wife was mizanek, because he says Shmuel it couldn't have been. It came from the husband, because the fact that he has a hole in his beitzim, it makes it unable to have children. Omer Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, on a similar topic, 4 lines from the top. Ptsua daka b'dei shamayim kosher. Ptsua daka that happens b'dei shamayim, it happens from heaven, it happens on its own. As we'll see, Rashi points out, what does it mean b'dei shamayim? Rashi says it means either it happened from birth or it happened from some supernatural occurrence. Then they are kosher. Amar Rava, says Rava, Hainu de Karinan psua. That's where the word psua, wounded, comes from. Lo Karinan ha psua. Doesn't mean the one who is wounded. Meaning, if the Torah said hapatsua, it would include anyone with this issue. Says Rava, the fact that it says patsua, it hones in on the detail that has to be man-made. If it happens from heaven, it's not an issue. Similarly, explains the Gemara, b'masnita tana nemar lo yavai ptsua v'nemar lo yavai mamzer malhalim b'dei adam avkam b'dei adam. Just like a mamzer is something that someone does on his own, so to a ptsua daka. So says the Gemara, if it's something that happens by Hashem, by birth, or something else, supernatural occurrence, then it does not have a din of a ptsua daka. Amar Rava, says Rava, ptsua bekulan. What does it mean, ptsua? It means bekulan, refers to all or any of the reproductive organs. Dach bekulan, crushed as well means the same thing, and krus bekulan, severed, means the same thing. Explains the Gemara. Ptsua bekulan, what does it mean that ptsua, wounded, refers to all the reproductive organs? Beishanifsa agid, beishanifsa beitzim, beishanifsa chute beitzim. 3 parts of the reproductive tract of the male organs. We have the gid, literally the member, the beitzim, as we already said, the testicles, then you have the chute beitzim, which are the cords, the duct inside that's bringing the semen from the testicles all the way out. If any one of these 3 areas are wounded, the person has the din of a psua daka. Similarly, dach, if any of these 3 areas are crushed, bekulan, bein shenidach hagid, bein shenidach beitzim, bein shenidach chute beitzim. Similarly, crus, if it's severed, bekulan, bein shenikras hagid, bein shenikras beitzim, bein shenikras chute beitzim. So if these three parts of the reproductive organs of the man, if any part of them are severed, crushed, or dissolved, then he has this din of a psua daka. Says the Gemara, Amar le'ahume Rabbanan the Rava, a certain Rav asked Rava, Mimai dai psua daka b'isei makom. How do you know that the Torah didn't tell us? And again, we have another incredible limud when the Torah doesn't write specifically what it's referring to, and we have to darshan. The Gemara comes along, says, let's figure it out. How do you know that psua daka refers to b'isei makom? How do you know it has anything to do with the reproductive system? Maybe it means it refers to his head. You know why? Because the Torah, when it talks about a psua daka, it doesn't talk about his future generations. So Shema Mina b'isamakim. Therefore, it's teaching us, the Torah is honing in and telling us this is one that cannot have children. So it must be that the malady, is with the reproductive organs, etc. Ask them, how do you know? Maybe it just means that it's an issur about him. but his children are kosher. Maybe he doesn't talk about his children because they're really kosher. The Isser only applies to the parents. And how do you know this is something specifically about the reproductive system? Explains the Gemara, Damya the Krus Shivcha, because the Psua Daka is similar to Kruf Shivcha, it's written together. Ma Kruf Shivcha by Samakam, Af Hainami by Samakam. So what's the kasha now, obviously? Kruf Shivcha, Gufemi Maid by Samakam. How do you know Kruf Shivcha refers to an issue with the reproductive system? Ask the Gemara. Ema Misifse Shivcha. Why don't we say that it refers to the ema misfase? Maybe it refers to his lip. Maybe he has a crack in his lip and the saliva drips out of his mouth. Maybe that's what the Torah is referring to. Says the Gemara, no. Shavcha ksiv b'makim sheshayfich, which means a place that it spills, and therefore it can't be referring to the mouth, because the mouth doesn't spill. Like, what has to be referred to? I say makai that ejaculates and spills it out. Says Gemara, 1 minute. Maybe it means from your nose that mucus spills out. Mikasiv b'shayfech. Says Gemara, it doesn't say in his shayfech, which would mean that it's a nose that is something that spills out. That what? Mish al yedei krisa shayfech. It's something that the krisa, that when there's an issue, now it is shayfech, now it spills the liquid, but shaloya yedei krisa, beforehand, einay shayfech ella mikaleach, it shoots it out, which refers to what? That refers to Aisem Makayim. Lafuki hai a nose always spills out liquids. But says the Gemara, for the fact that it says, it doesn't say krus, doesn't say shvaich, rather it says krus shivcha, teaches that via the cross it is shivcha, meaning it is the reproductive system that used to do what? Mikaleach. It would ejaculate, it would shoot it out. But now, via this issue, it spills. That's how we know it refers to the reproductive system. Another raya says the Gemara, 10 lines from the white lines. We must need the Tamanemer lo yavo to a daka. Venemer lo yavo mamzer malalan b'zimakmav we've seen before. Now says the Gemara, getting a little bit more technical. What exactly is this krus shivcha? Nikiv lamata me'atar shekinegdai. Says the Gemara, lamala me'atara. If there's a hole below the atara, which we've already explained, is the corona, is the top. If it goes diagonally, that goes from the top and it comes out from the other side below the atara, he thought that's kosher, doesn't have din a krus shivcha. No, any part of the atara is going to make him not able to have children, and therefore considered a krus shivcha. And the Mishnah said if there's a little bit left of the atara, even a hair's breadth remaining of the atara, the corona, the top, it's going to make him kosher. So Yosef Ravina, 4 lines from the white lines, become late, and he was asking, this hair's breadth that needs to be left of the aver, alpanei kuloi, alpanei rubai, does it have to be left over the entire aver or just on the majority of the corona? Amar lei, Rava Taisfala Ravina Malechot alpanei rubai uklabe roishai, and it means on the upper side. Amar Ravuna kikolmes, it means kishera. If it has a cut like a kolmes, like a quill pen, which is on a diagonal, then it is kosher. But if it's cut like a gutter, then it's going to be puzzle. Why? Because one, the air could go in, and one, the air cannot go in, and the difference will be whether the zera will able to come out and still be able to have children. If the air is going to go in, it's going to make the zera, it's going to destroy the zera. Why the opposite? High grid, high low grid. Says Rav Chisda, excuse me. Why? Because if it's like the gutter cut, then it does come out properly. The other way, it does not. And Rav Paskins will conclude with this. Because and whereas Rav Chisda's reasoning, so the fact that it still comes out, the Chavita says, Rava, no, it's like the barza Chavita, the spigot of a barrel that will come out, and therefore the Rav Chisda's way of explaining is incorrect, and rather Rava Paskins like Rav Huna, and we'll pick it up from Ravina Mir Tashem in the next year.